Well, good evening,
Hello, everybody.
everybody. Good evening. We've got Mr. Fleetside back for part 6. Good evening, Mr. Fleetside in Canada,
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Yes.
and good afternoon to Captain Crunch over there
Oh,
in
Captain.
Southern
Hey, all
California.
right. You noticing the captain? All right, cool. Right on.
Captain Crunch. Yeah.
Captain says
Yeah.
hi.
Yep. Okay. Anyway, we're delighted that you've managed to make it because I think it's actually been a case of with this COVID stuff, you've been finishing a wee bit earlier.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Today I actually got held up. Got held up on a troubleshooting a smart lock, and just ended up being a longer day today. But generally, yeah. Lately, we're not getting. Basically, people only want you in their home right now if they're melting down.
Yeah.
So that's generally what it's coming down to. So yeah, it's been a little bit slower, but I've been working every day. But yeah.
Well, I mean, I was just about melting down earlier, as Fleetside will testify, because I could not get any of the slides that he sent me to appear, and so eventually I said, well, why don't we screen share your computer rather than mine? And that's
Right.
exactly what we did. And with about 10 minutes of trying to set everything up, we managed to sort it out. I think, didn't we, Mr. Fleetside? Well, let's crack on. Let's see what we've managed to do. I need to click on this to add it to the stream, and look at that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
$1 make me holla. How you do
Yep.
that? Yeah. Sorry, that's a song, you know. Yeah.
Well, you've got lots of songs that I know nothing about.
I know.
Yeah, I'll take it away, Mr. Fleetside. It's all yours.
Yeah, and I'll advance the screens.
Okay.
$1 makes me holler. Great American dollar. Okay, so
it was a rap song that had that lyric in it, but anyway.
Well, hopefully the dude will not break into song, because that can be particularly painful. But anyway.
Okay, so I'll jump right in.
Slang.
So today's session is we call this the weather forecast, and the notion of whether where things are going to go and whether they're going to go. I'm actually getting a feedback in my my hearing, so I'll motor without the.
Maybe that's me. Hold on.
It's coming back with a. So let me try and do it without the.
Well, let's see now. I plugged in my headphone.
Is that better?
You can tell me whether you hear me or not. Okay, so it's called the weather forecast. Whether the judge is going to make a call here or what she's going to do, and whether she adopts more of a flight path or a fight path, we're about to find out. So the question is whether she's going to zig or she's going to zag. We know that to date, from all the great research that truthers have done, and certainly you two fine gentlemen have been at the core of some of this, quite satisfied with the not guilty perspective, mainly because a lot of the research that's been done has led to the notion that for the timelines required in the official narrative, one would have to sort of suspend time and space as we know it. And from the burn pit perspective, this notion of burning a body in the backyard, you'd pretty much have to suspend physics as we know it.
Right.
And of course, there have been a number of compelling theories on other, contrary to the Denny limitation, the other number of alternative players. So together, I think truthers have destroyed the official narrative and are quite comfortable in that position. But also, truthers have uncovered systematic impropriety. So starting back with the Penny Bernstein situation, the Gregory Allen, at the point where that exculpatory evidence on Gregory Allen was withheld from Stephen Avery through to the 2005, October 31, 2005 escapades, and then followed by a period of lack of transparency on the part of the state, which included destruction of evidence, and which pretty much painted the picture of a perpetuating curve of continuous recurring same players doing the same things to sort of maintain a narrative that doesn't add up. And so we've done a series. I'll get into some of the history of what we've done in the earlier series, but the whole idea here is to look at what lies ahead, and in terms of schedule and damages. And in this regard, I would suggest we're opening more doors than we're closing, in the sense that I'll unpack some thoughts on what I personally think is ahead, and each of us would have our own view on what is correct. And I have to disclaim, I am not a lawyer. I've done my share of work in civil litigation stuff, but not as a lawyer. And so, you know, I'll try to unpack my logic as best I can. And obviously everybody out there can status this differently, and some of the input and feedback would be very important to any suggested corrections or reorientations. So the series we've done to date are as follows. We did the Quest for the Holy Grail, where we looked at the various truther camps out there and the nature of speculation, and we looked at the burden of the claim. That was on March 3rd, and then on March 14th we did Two Truths Are Told, and we looked at the merit in macro argumentation and the consequence of under-targeting or being unduly narrow in our reasoning. That was March 14th. Part 3 on March 17th, we dealt with the probity and analysis on managing the Great Divide, and this is where I was introducing my thought on the XY curve, or put simply, the difference between tactical thinking and probity or truthful thinking, probity and analysis, which is where we would expect the institutions to be centered on probity and analysis, not tactical advantage. And then part 4, here's what's broken. That was March 20th. We looked at the justice in the various institutions. We looked at their mission, vision statements, and also noted the perspective of the reasonable person. In other words, truthers is an extremely important component of how the justice system operates, so that there's confidence of the public. Part 5 was adjusting the lens. That was the last go, and where I was introducing this notion of the yellow brick road, and there were 7 points of malfeasance that we identified in there and called the factory of malfeasance. And part 6, weather forecast. So here's where we are: fight or flight. The way I was going to propose to go through this, and you guys can by all means jump in anytime. So I was going to go through the payout, the basis of payment, and the method of payment. So basis of payment, and by that I mean the calculation of what the entitlement would be, the rightful entitlement. And then method of payment is the payout approach, how the monies are recouped. I was going to talk about this thing I use in here called a 50% reduction factor, and that ties into how egregious this situation is if allegations, if the situation as we understand it, and the allegations are correct. Then you've got the circuit court, where they sit today and what the options and considerations are, and then we'll get into our short range and long range weather forecast. So I'll move to the next. So the first piece is the payout, the entitlement, and so I refer to that as the basis of payment. And within that, I'll carefully set out what my calculations are, what the assumptions are that go with those calculations, again, so that people can support or complain and adjust. So really trying to unpack it to share what the elements of the thinking are. Of course, in there one has to get the schedule. So to calculate the entitlement, one has to define at what point, at what milestone Mr. Avery will be freed. And then we get into the damages, the punitive components. So damages are what he was out in terms of his time locked up, and punitive is lessened to the state. And then legal costs, so obviously Ms. Zellner's costs and whatever other costs they have going on there, and that brings us to a nice little total.
Sure.
So the just before I get into the numbers, part of the assumptions in my sense of this is what we have is so we know about the 36 million that was in the first the first incarceration, and we know that Peg Lautenschlager had that had granted a pardon, and that was forgiven, and Stephen Avery signed his life away on the $400K settlement. So what I'm suggesting is that 36 million would be reinstated as an entitlement, and so notwithstanding Peg L's no fault proclamation, and in part, I think the reasoning, my view, the reasoning there is that she is likely to be considered part of the engineering of this thing, which would, in my sense of it, to nullify any sense of a proclamation on her part, that the pardon, so to speak. The assumption too is the 1 million per year that was calculated within the incarceration one. It was 1 million per year for damages to Mr. Avery, and 1 million for punitive, making 2 million per year times your 18 is your 36 million. So I'm assuming that 1 million is reasonable and adequate and would carry forward.
Sure.
The third, so the 1 million punitive for the second incarceration, though. So I mentioned the 1 million damages would carry forward linearly. The punitive, though, I would amplify, and there should be a dialogue around amplification. It's a more egregious situation for this system to have perpetrated a prolonged incarceration to get out of where it was headed with the depositions, and so there would be some magnifying factor. I put 4. Some people may go lower, some people may go higher.
Right.
And obviously that's one of 2 huge variables in the calculation. So we'll come back to that. But due to the egregious nature, purposely calculated maneuver, what I would call, I think the argument will come to an egregious breach of office. Assuming the court determinations align with the schedule. So I'll talk about what I think the schedule is, and each of us will have our own view on that. But I'll put one hypothesis down there that I would put more money on, and then that brings us to calculation of his entitlement in 3 buckets: the damages, the punitive, and the legal costs. So here's my schedule, and this is my crystal ball is no clearer than anyone else's, and we'll all have a different view, and this is where the debate begins. But my sense of it is that the circuit court, where we are currently, I put down a finding there of June. I think their official date is now what, May 29th or something. And
oh, those are meant to be 2020.
2020. So yeah, sorry, 2020. Yes.
Okay. Follow you. Okay.
Thanks for that. Yeah. So the circuit court finding in June, I think it's May 29th, and there was
that's question. What the new date is. Yeah, May 29th.
Yeah. And then the KZ rebuttal to that I've got for August, giving her 60 days or so, and then the state court finding. So in at the end of the year, December, evidentiary hearing and further state. So I'm assuming she'll win her argument on the evidentiary hearing, but then you get into the fun of the actual hearing itself and the potential for obfuscation and delay.
Right.
And eventually, at the end of that, I'm assuming the state will be thinking with its wallet, and it will somehow side in favor. So it'll take another round for her to go there. But that's obviously a controversial position. So I've got the right years toward the end there. I apologize for the 2000 typo there. So I'm looking at freedom for Stephen in the 2027 timeframe, 7 years out. We'll see.
I don't think that's unreasonable.
Unfortunately, what I've learned about wrongful convictions and everything else, I think that may be a fair assessment.
Yeah. Unfortunately, much as we'd like to see it.
Much as we'd like to see it happen sooner, reality's a bitch. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been, at least it's safe to say it's been a series of unfortunate disappointments as we move forward. So 2027 now. So the damage calculations on that basis are simply your 1 million per year for the 18 years. On the first incarceration, that's the ask. And then on the second incarceration, if you apply the same thing, the 1 million per year just carries forward linearly. That would be a second incarceration term of 22 years, which is your $22 million. And so for the damage component, you're looking at 40 million, which is a figure that's beyond anything that I've seen in these sorts of wrongful conviction suits. But that pales in comparison to what we're about to get into. So the next piece is the punitive. So this is the lesson for the state. And so for the punitive for the first term, I just mimicked exactly what we had in the first incarceration, ask 1 million per year for 18 years, 18 million. And then on the punitive ask in the second incarceration, the same 1 million, but with a magnifier of 4 times. There'll be a magnifier of some proportion. I put 4 times, bringing that total to 80 million. And so the total so far between the damages and the punitive is 106 million. Oh, sorry, that's the punitive is 106, yeah. And then the legal costs that I put assuming these would really be KZ's costs, 1.5 million per year. 1.5 million may sound like a lot, but it doesn't get you much in legal circles. And be interesting to get other people's perspectives on that. And I think she'll have been engaged at that point 11 years. By the time 2027 rolls around, that's 16.5 million.
Right.
So the total amount then would be your damages, your punitive, your legal. And I've added a line there that you don't often see in legal circles called gratuity. And this is where the state gets to give KZ a bonus, KZ a bonus for having done such a wonderful job. I set that at 0 for now. But
you mean their job for them, you mean? Right, yeah.
Here's a tip. When you buy a beer, you give a tip. Right?
Yeah.
So the total 162.5 times 50%. So this is the 50% factor. This is the reality factor that I put in there just to attenuate based on that disappointment that we often see when these things come through. I'll unpack the 50% in a moment.
Right.
Sure.
That's your 81.25.
Yep.
Yeah. So in total, 162.5 times 60%. So somehow my system is reality. My system is feedback.
You're hearing yourself. Don't worry, it's happened to all of us.
So you're 81.25 million. So some of the assumptions. I'm gonna catch my notes here. So the assumption is the lawsuit. So I'm assuming when they come to recover this amount of money, there's certain assumptions that come with it. So let's assume 10 of your favorite henchmen get named in this thing and are individually liable for the costs. And then, of course, the insurance factor, we're not anticipating insurance will pay out or backstop or because of the purposeful instigation. So 10 parties will underwrite the debt as a first call, which will bankrupt them. And then the county state will share in underwriting the balance on a 50-50 basis. Those are my assumptions.
Right.
So, oops, sorry about that. How far did I get?
You were just past this one. And then
out of those 10, you can choose your favorite people.
Yes.
Let's assume they each had $500K in equity. Times 10 is your $5 million recovery. So the county and the state each fund the balance of the $76.25 million. Trying to make sure I don't skip ahead here. So Wisconsin, the Wisconsin budget, annual budget's $50 billion a year, if I have that correct. So the Stephen Avery component would be a smidgen, a 38.1 million on a scale of 50 billion is about 0.762% of the
less than 1% of their budget.
Annual budget. Doesn't sound like much, but that's a whole state, and we're talking about one person.
Right.
Now Manitowoc, on the other hand, I think their annual budget's 30 million, and so the Stephen Avery entitlement would be 38.1 out of 30 million, is 127% of the budget. So that's going to require a special levy to be able to recover that. In other words, that would be tantamount to people having to pay twice the tax in 1 year.
Right.
A little more than that. Let's see if I can. So now to get to that 50% discount factor, we talked before about the house without a foundation, and so the system itself, we're all struggling to understand the weird and wonderful dimensions of this thing. But given, and I'll get into why the 50% as opposed to some larger discount, or in other words, a smaller punitive amount. So I've already dropped the 162 to 182.5. And the argument is as follows. So it's one thing for an individual to commit an egregious act that misleads the court. It's quite another thing for a group of recurring individuals to mislead the court in successive actions. So this is if the allegations of the system are correct, this is a recurring and repeating malfeasance of epic proportion. And then, of course, it's another thing for a court to knowingly accept what I refer to as this factor of malfeasance, to play along and accept the charade, which is kind of where we sit today. The question for the current judge is whether she will see this for what as truthers see it, or whether she will sort of do something else, the fight or flight. Mm-hmm. And this is we talked last time about this factory of malfeasance. So what so we talked in one of the earlier presentations about what is the essence of the story, and a lot of people are quick to turn to what happened to Teresa Halbach, October 31, 2005. But in my sense of it, although that's intriguing, the larger story here is the succession of 7 points. So the Sandra Morris episode that was before the Penny Bernstein, but where there was a perhaps a less than proportionate application of legal recoil. And then, but truly in the Penny Bernstein situation, if as truthers understand it, that was in any way engineered to cause Stephen Avery to go away, that would be in a further egregious action, obviously. And then to compound that, the concealment of the Gregory Allen information that would have been exculpatory for Stephen and let him languish for 8 years in concealing that from the courts. To obviously the one we've studied very carefully, the number 4 was the Teresa Halbach wrongful conviction. And I've added to that the Brendan Dassey episode, where the Reed technique is used to in name alone, but has extended to the point where they've really entrapped somebody, grabbed sound bites, used that in court. It was the allegation there that was pretty much engineered as well, and was a necessary component of having the Stephen Avery allegations stick. And then item 5 was the suppression of evidence. So this whole fight for transparency has been very bizarre, contrary to the institutional underpinnings that we talked about in one of the earlier presentations. And not to mention within that, the destruction of evidence, so the bones. And where we sit today, the tactical, what I would say looks like tactical subterfuge of the circuit court. And that just continues to move on.
Sure.
And the odd thing about this whole situation is the system expands. It almost, if you were to model it, it expands in proportion with the argumentation, but it continues to expand. So we started with individuals in the Sandra Morris, and then we got into Manitowoc and the Penny Bernstein, and then in the Stephen Avery, in the 2005, it included Calumet, and the circuit court is now part of this drama. Are they going to see integrity, or where are they going to go on this thing? And we noticed coincidental with the Avery bill and Peg Lautenschlager's intervention on or arrival on the scene, let's say. The state really became part of the drama as well. Certainly the state court is currently there now, and we'll likely get to the Supreme Court if time keeps marching forward and we don't get a resolution. But the system itself rebounds, notwithstanding all the stellar work of truthers. I find it very strange. It certainly doesn't survive the average person test, which the truthers, I think, are reasonably representing. So it's a larger system that appears to protect itself. Is my
right,
argument.
and I think, and what this is
this 50% factor. What should be
right?
What should be permitted in terms of a discount would cause me to aim higher rather than lower.
Sure.
And I think I see what you're saying there. Can you hear me, Fleetside? And that graph there, basically what you're showing is as the timeline goes along, more and more agents of the state, whether they right, and I think, and what this is, whether they're personally involved or not, more and more of the agents of the state just kind of jump on board with this thing and keep the train rolling. Is basically what that graph was saying, right?
Yeah,
I think I see what you're saying there. Can you hear me, Fleetside?
Yeah, I barely. So I'm just in
that graph there. Basically, what you're showing. Some kind of a delay, unfortunately, for you.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry about that. Hello.
No worries. Can you hear me?
I'm just wondering if you're hearing the delayed video.
Yeah, like he's listening to YouTube instead of StreamYard.
Yeah.
I think that's what happened. I had YouTube going as well. Geez, it's driving me nuts. Sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead.
No worries. Okay,
so you are running the show tonight.
You know what it
pal.
is.
There you go. No, what I was saying was that last graph you put up, I believe when I looked at it, what it was saying to me was that it starts out with people who have a personal vendetta, but as it went along, it just became a point where the state became interested in wanting to keep it down. And so therefore more and more agents of the state jumped onto this bandwagon without even having a personal vendetta. But
so it's emotion free. It's purely a tactical protection by the, it does appear that way to me. Like everyone is doing their level best to do what exactly? I don't think they're following a moral compass, but I think they're tactically trying to outmode and that's the dilemma. So you're dredging up ever greater parts of this system that are leaning against an extremely weak argument and a very dangerous one. That's the
interesting. Okay.
So I think I figured out my sound issue. I apologize. Yeah, I was
no worries.
Somehow I had ourselves playing to ourselves. And,
you always got to mute the YouTube window.
But anyway, the
one Erekose is enough. You don't want two of them.
Yeah. Same could go for Mr. Mad Capaldi Scotsman there. But anyway.
So the circuit court options and considerations. So what are they going to do as they roll the dice? So one thing to consider there is the amount that I came up with there. That's about $2,500 per Manitowoc household. That was the 50% component that they pay. If my timelines are right, we can, again, challenge but to date, about 2/3 is sunk, right? So even if you went out to 2027, 2/3 of that is history. But what the current judge is opining on is whether to keep the train rolling, or whether to grab the truth train to borrow from a famous song.
Get on the train.
I got a guitar right here.
There you go.
And then so there's about 1/3 left to they could save themselves a lot of trouble if they want to break to the truth and get to reality. I think I do think that the truth will prevail sooner or later. But as you're pointing out, the system has a vested interest, and I think it isn't until you get a court that to which this is sufficiently incidental, which is at a more senior level, right? So even at the almost 0.75% on the Wisconsin state level, I don't know that's so the state court may go that way, or you may have to reach above that.
Yeah.
It's like the thin blue line in legal circles. I don't know what you call that, but one court protecting another, maybe.
Yeah.
But the thing that really I find odd is certainly the world is watching. We know the difference and define the difference between principle and tactic. And when you get findings, so you see a very sober brief go in that is highly detailed and has the key points in there, and to have a response that is the consequence of extensions and delays, where half the points are missed, and there is very dissatisfying and awkward drafting and jurisprudence that's kind of bizarrely applied. It's almost like an Orwellian newspeak kind of document that comes back. We know, we're all watching, we're all right here. But there'll be, I think, ahead further delays, distractions, books, movies. That PR campaign may kick in yet ahead.
Right.
But the point is, we're right here. We're watching.
Yeah.
So my suggestion is, they're gonna run out the clock. I think KZ I keep calling her KZ. That's Canadian.
Yeah.
KZ, as you say. Yeah. So she runs out the clock. She doesn't, but the state will, and at all levels, I think they'll run out the clock, buy time. And I think we are in that game, as Casey had said, we're fighting to the last dime. It's an unfortunate. It doesn't bode well for those interested in integrity of institutions, but I suspect that's where we're at.
Oh. That's where Manitowoc and Calumet are taking it.
Yeah,
everybody wants to be tight-lipped and shut up.
Yeah.
Well, that tells me you got something to hide.
Yeah. Well, that's it. And all turkeys don't vote for Christmas, do they? You know, they're not going to jump in and say, you know, we give up. You know.
Yeah, that's fair.
But drinking on the job, I like this. So, so this pie chart is the unfortunate reality for Stephen, right? If you take his, we had the pie chart up here before, and he didn't have that yellow zone. But if you look at his adult life from the time he was 18 to, I think the average lifespan in the U.S. is something like 76 years. So I just used that interval. And we looked at incarceration 1 is that lighter orange, and then incarceration 2 to date is the second, the darker orange.
Yep.
Then you've got the yellow piece in there is the what's forward, you know, assuming went out to 2027. But this running out the clock business is extinguishing the value of this thing. I mean, we're justice delayed is justice denied is the concern.
Yeah, it's about a quarter, isn't it? Is what you're basically saying. You know, he's going to have a quarter of his adult life to actually enjoy it, and it just depends on what he does in that.
He'll be rich.
Doesn't it? But I don't think for him that it's so much the money, is it? It's the the fact that for all these years he's been cast as this evil person, and and to actually put that right.
Yeah, so he's got. You're right. He's and that's assuming 2027 works. I mean, this is it's a shrinking prize, and if you think of the family relationships, the parents, kids, your aspirations in life, this is a very serious matter that the collection of institutions seem to be blowing past for their convenience.
Sure. But it's got to be a case of, you cannot let this sort of what's gone on go on in the future. There has to be a deterrence, doesn't there?
Yeah, there has to be, and that's that multiplying factor that the 4 times. So this notion of egregious. So if the state were to learn a lesson off the first one, what it would mean to have a state, I call it the state, the system, whatever you want to, hard to put boundaries around it. But this notion that they would be accused, culpable, and then during the depositions have another event, that should that be orchestrated, that's in terms of how egregious this is, there'd be a hell of a multiplier on that. So the long range forecast, scattered delays, obfuscations, PR stunts, until that we're waiting for that Zelnami to downpour of integrity. But if you can,
it'll be nice to see. So.
It's going to be it's going to be a slow burn, I suspect. She's keeping her powder dry. She knows a lot more than she can say, and she's playing attack. But it's a shame to see the road show pushed down, pushed to the right on schedule.
Right.
And that's pretty well it. Yeah.
Oh.
So
I've got a couple of questions, but I'm going to let ladies first. So on you go, dude. You fire away if you've got a couple of questions you'd like to.
Ladies first. Ladies in the chat. You have a question?
Sorry, gentlemen. Sorry, dude. Yeah, look, you go first, okay? Because you're younger.
You go ahead, Paul.
You're younger than me. Well, I was okay.
Age before beauty. Go ahead.
First of all, it's interesting, isn't it? When you look at the amount that the attorney gets of the money that Kathleen Zellner, I think it's something like 33% she gets anyway, doesn't she? So she will get 33% of that 70 million.
Of the, whatever the settlement,
I'm
settlement
sure,
is.
yes,
Right.
plus the legal costs.
Yeah.
I seem to remember Vic Fazell in his civil suit, although they changed the tax codes and they managed to wangle it so that he ended up with nothing. He was at one time he got something like, I think it was a $48 million settlement. But anyway, it was a huge amount that he got. And then they changed tax codes and basically didn't end up with anything. T1 was asking what his cut is. He'd be happy with 1%. I think we all would. Sorry. T1 was asking for a friend. Sorry,
he's always asking for a friend. 50% of his questions are asking for a friend. Anyway.
Yeah, okay. No, it's great stuff that he does. So anyway, in this scenario, which hopefully is going to happen, are we assuming that somebody or some people take Stephen Avery's place in prison for having done the crime, or is this simply a case of it doesn't matter whether Kathleen Zellner shows who actually did it, just the fact that Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey didn't do it?
Yeah, in my view, it's because of the egregious actions that led to, I use that term, I'm an engineer, so I like that term, engineering. Imagine an institution engineering an outcome, and that's the egregious breach, if, assuming that is correct. Now, if obviously, if they can put another name in there, that would help solidify the case. But I don't think the egregious nature, I look at that simply as the actions of the co-conspirators to use the institution outside its sort of moral footings to engineer conclusions. This is the egregious. It's like the Wild West for free system. So I don't think they have to. She'd have to name the alternative. But it does beg the question: if there is an alternative, there's no statute of limitations on murder. Why aren't they pursuing reasonable alternatives?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Sorry, Erekose, would you like to?
Would I like to?
Anything you'd like to?
What? Address T1 saying for me to stop sending him questions?
Oh,
okay,
right.
buddy. I'll stop sending you questions.
Okay. Another question I would ask would be quite simply the fact that if it was shown that it was actually the state, as in Manitowoc Sheriff's Department, somebody within the Sheriff's Department, that was responsible for the disappearance of Teresa, either whisking her away somewhere, which at the moment I must admit I've always had trouble with this idea that this pile of cremains proves that it's Teresa's. I think that, dude, you've always realised I've had that problem with just accepting that because somebody signed a death certificate that's Teresa. Yeah, we've got bones being handed back from the family. That might suggest that they knew that it's Teresa's. But what I find difficult to comprehend is how would Manitowoc and Wisconsin cope with the idea that she was actually killed to order?
Yeah, so I don't know, and maybe Eric would best to answer that, given that's sort of the camp you're in. Yeah.
I'll say Manitowoc hiring a hitman to kill her, or convincing somebody to do it, is not one of my favorite theories personally. For me, I see this as either somebody really close to her who couldn't let her go did this, and knowing that there would be, knowing that they could manipulate law enforcement because of their hate for Stephen Avery, this person could have walked into the situation eyes wide open in that sense. I also believe that she could have been being pursued by somebody that we don't even fucking know, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that it's possible that somebody was stalking her and we don't even know who that is.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that this person may have done all that stuff. She may have been found, her body, her cremains, whatever may have been found somewhere else, was then brought over there. And that's why we're seeing it strewn around the quarries as it was being brought up to Stephen Avery's burn pit. That's the way I see it. So I kind of favor those two and less of the murder for hire. But I accept it as a possibility.
Yeah, so we're, and I guess we're all keeping an open mind. I think that was the subject in the first video where we were looking at the different camps and where people sat, and I was talking about the burden of argumentation, and of course the kind of thing you're talking about. Let's say, for example, hypothetically, there was someone stalking her, and that was the killer. So she did die that day. It was a murder, and it was the part of the challenge in that, of course, is to answer the question, how did the depositions coincidentally get derailed, right? So there's a huge coincidence there. That doesn't defeat it. That just means part and parcel of that theory one would want to look at.
The fact that it's such a coincidence, right?
Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah. It was not only coincidental. I think they were down to the desperate strokes of wasn't it Dvorak and Kucerik were left?
Well, yes,
imminently. Who were trying to derail it. They were trying to.
Vogel and Kucerik were arranged to be in 10 and 15 days time after. So
the incredible precision in there. So that I'm just raising that as the coincidence. How does one explain that? There was a lot to do about the reaction of the family, and in two ways. One was the oddities in search that that they didn't come dashing out to find. It's not like anybody was looking for Teresa. They were looking for evidence or a car, but there seemed to be a disconnect there. And there was also a question about the extent of the family reaction. And I think we satisfy ourselves that different families grieve differently, and at a sensitivity, we don't walk too far down that road. But together with the coincidence, there's a number of factors in there. The Carmen Bootwell coincidence could be nothing, but disappearing on that it was on the very day, wasn't it, or within?
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, yeah, it's well, she did she not die on the Wednesday, and obviously the bones were found, the remains were found the following, was it Monday or Tuesday? Was it this?
Yeah, and the coincidence of the finding of the bones. Yeah,
but for me, what's striking are two things. There's the blood from the bloody hair in the back of the RAV4. Now that could have been, a staged event, but to me that suggests somebody being hit, and the fact that her phone became deactive at 2:47.
Yeah, so
at least no more phone calls. It suggests to me that she possibly didn't make it very far out of the salvage yard before she quite possibly, as Zalna has pointed out, she was flagged down for a hustle shot. Who knows, that hustle shot might have already been prearranged. Nobody would know that, would they?
Right. Yeah. So you're back into coincidence. One would have to, part and parcel. That's not to diminish that thought. Just to attach to that, then somebody would have to explain the coincidence, and that could be a good. I think as Erekose was just starting to say that somebody could have been realizing they could pin this on Stephen Avery at a heightened time of anxiety, so they had an opportunity that wouldn't otherwise have. That's not a bad, that's not a bad comeback to that point. But
Right.
a good person to talk to there would be Dr. Silkman. So if I understand his research so far correctly, he did I think it was a 7 loci test, or looked at the 7 loci test that confirmed that the sample relates to what was found in the RAV, and that's under the assumption that the sample represented from the RAV is real, I guess, and also that the sample that comes from the PAP test is authentic, and the only caveat, normally I wouldn't get too excited about those kinds of things, except when you look at the death certificate and the oddities there, the timing, and strange as all hell. So you've got official institutions issuing weird documentation, and therefore you're left with this question: how much do you trust? How much foundational information can you trust when you're making these assumptions? But certainly the 7 loci would be very tight, highly improbable. If those are genuine samples, then it would be that it would be another party. I understand that. But certainly Dr. Silkman's done a lot of good work to burrow into that.
Yeah, I always had this this ongoing debate with Sheriff Herman about the fact that when do all these coincidences become a pattern?
Right.
And he was trying to tell me that he knew nothing of basically of what I was trying to suggest. That couldn't have happened. That couldn't have happened. So you end up thinking, well, could there have been this amazing coincidence of certain things happening the way they did?
Yeah.
But it's just the fact that Steve was the last person, the last call, at least as far as we know, he was the last call.
Right.
Which makes you think that, maybe there was this other hustle shot that had been arranged. It's
So if it was engineered, that wouldn't be a surprise that Stephen was the last.
Yeah.
If it was a coincidental murderer, that would require a little extra engineering on the part of whoever that is to make sure that they had that very carefully, didn't leave any trace that pointed to other than Stephen, and in terms of timing and then part and parcel of that theory is that the system simply attached to that a whole lot of manufactured framing.
Right.
And so the guilt of so when I'm talking about those large numbers and how egregious the state is, I'm assuming in those numbers that this was engineered and orchestrated to get out of those depositions.
Right.
I'm not assuming a coincidence, which would be something else. If it was negligence, they did their level best, and the evidence just pointed to the wrong person, and we're sorry, mea culpa, we won't do it again.
Right.
And that was the argument in the first incarceration, or started to be, until they, got off the hook.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what's interesting is the fact that you've got in the first case, what of that $36 million claim was he likely to end up with? According to Mike Griesbach, when I first contacted him, he reckoned that Steve would have got somewhere between 3 and 5 million.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's obviously he had all these meetings with various people that were completely unminuted, so we've no idea what they discussed. But I think that's slightly conservative. To come from 18 million down to 5 million, 3 or 5 million. I must admit, I'm with you on this idea that there could be this sort of 50% discount, if you like. If the price, if the price is £5 and and you come in with an offer of £1, you're probably going to meet at somewhere around about £2.50, aren't you?
First trade to the center, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the problem I have is certainly, I think that 3 to 5 million would be consistent with lawsuits averaging the average lawsuit for that kind of wrongful conviction. That doesn't sound out of the ballpark. But the situation in this case, if correct, so if one, in asserting that the system actually set this up and then further set up another mystery to squirm off the hook to avoid justice, and that's a hugely different range of egregiousness.
Right.
It's not your normal wrongful incarceration, and those that pay off in the 3 to 5 range, I think, are those one could reasonably argue negligence, or maybe they didn't do their due diligence, or maybe they did and just whatever. But this, we're talking about a whole different snack bracket here. This is deliberate, and if correct, it is deliberate and intentional, and it's a system that's expanding so to protect itself. And this is not how the system is supposed to work.
Sure.
No.
There's a question here that I must admit I do like, from Texas 2 counties.
Both counties are in his name, by the way, folks.
Exactly, Texas. Not because he covers 2 counties, but yes.
Interesting. So can you use failure analysis to analyze a murder or a conspiracy? I don't know why not. It's a social failure analysis, as in you can do sensitivity analysis on different risk points and try to all kinds of weird Monte Carlo simulation. You can model this thing to look for failure points, and but that would be the behavior of the whole system. I think what's let's say you did do that, you'd get into the coincidence of these coincidences in the 7 steps. Like coincidence 1 would be the same players. So for some reason, the system can't reach outside a certain pond. The same players are called back unnaturally, and the same players represent other players in court actions. It's an incestuous by design sort of troop. So you'd have to factor all that in there.
Okay.
Failure analysis would work in a typical litigation, but I don't know about this. Yeah.
Here's an interesting comment. Sorry, dude, it keeps blocking you out. I would gladly swap with you if I could. But
I'm fine.
If you could read it out for us.
I'm not vain. Let's see. I think if it was completely engineered by the state, there would have been more THDNA evidence. Where would they have gotten it, though?
Well, they can.
I mean, before they got the pap smears and all that stuff that they asked for eventually, where would they have gotten it?
Yeah. So first of all, I think that's a fair question. It's I would definitely put that on the storyboard and then attempt to answer it. And it
Sure.
may, in fact, it may be the right question to ask. I think that's a good question. I would assume there'd be many DNA samples available, whether she was alive or not.
The Pepsi can in her car, I guess. Yeah.
Legacy stuff, right? So
Yeah.
but it's almost as if the DNA is a problem unto itself, which brings us back to other theories. Those that are thinking on the alive side of things, there's a downplaying of DNA. Or let's say, for example, Carmen's bones were used. You don't want to confuse DNAs. Let's say the pap sample used to do the 7 loci test was really from someone else. I don't know how they engineer that, but hey, this whole thing's rather strange.
Right.
So it's a fair question. I don't know that it defeats any of the propositions, but it's that should go on the storyboard. Yeah.
A question then. If I have no doubt that those figures could be absolutely spot on. It'd be interesting to see if in 7 years' time we're here celebrating Steve getting awarded in the region of 73 million. In fact, I saw a thing yesterday where I can't remember what video it was on, but somebody suggested that Steve's going to get somewhere in the region of 72 million. I presume they got to this. How they 36 million twice, yes, is 72 million, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's another.
Yeah,
Probably my 50% discount factor.
yeah,
But as you're pointing out, I think the 36 million was never in the cards. Like I would assume, I didn't see it. That was the ask, was it not?
yes,
So,
yes.
so and then this horse trading or however, I would have thought there'd be. So to me, the 36 million would mean 18 million.
Yeah.
In that, but but I think it accelerates too, right? So I would discount, even if, as Mr. Griesbach had mentioned, that your 36 million became 5 million. That's in a scenario where you've got one data point and you've got this whatever happened wasn't appropriate. Negligence, I think they would probably put that down to. But imagine a scenario where that system then rebounded to protect itself by orchestrating another that violated due process. I mean, that is, to me, if the 72 were in the art of the possible, that would be, as far as I know, that'd be an unprecedented settlement for a wrongful incarceration. But the point is, this is an unprecedented circumstance. This is incredible.
He lost his audio, didn't he?
So
Nope.
I can't hear you guys, folks. Can you hear them?
I can hear Fleetside. Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry. Got it.
Okay, good.
We just
That was
thought you
my
got
end.
bored.
Sorry, my end, folks.
Let's
Apologies.
No need to apologize. We're just glad that you're here, even if it's just to look at rather than
Even
hear.
if I couldn't hear, yeah. Right on.
All right. I see. Okay. This I suppose is slightly alluding to a certain guilter who I'm not too sure what kind of guilter she is, but we've had. And Erekose knows who I'm alluding to. Somebody that's actually pointing this out to us about a year ago. She was saying, so basically Manitrock is FC UK'd by Stephen Avery because of the amount of money that it's now going to cost them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
is this cause for concern? I can always remember when I first started looking on the internet for various pictures about Manitrock Sheriff's Department, Stephen Avery. You kept getting up these. There was this one I kept seeing, and it was a map of Wisconsin, and I wouldn't want to live here. And then it was Manitrock, and I definitely wouldn't want to live there. And there was a suggestion that even people would deliberately leave Manitrock in order to avoid
paying the extra taxes.
paying this because I mean it's at the end of the day it was their sheriff's department that have done this. They voted in the people to run the sheriff's department, didn't they?
Right.
It's an interesting, who actually who benefits from all of this and who actually pays, because if Teresa's lost her life and you get Stephen Brendan out and nobody there to replace them, then I must admit I do have a certain sympathy with this opinion that from a pragmatic point of view it's pretty bad for. You've got people in the sheriff's department that have basically played Russian roulette with somebody's life in order to try and protect themselves, and they've used everybody else in the county. I get that. I do get that.
And that's precisely where I would say the current judge is sitting.
Yeah,
because she's doing the same thing now. This pie chart is shrinking. And her actions or inactions, if wrong, will be no different than what you just portrayed. And to the guilter that maybe I didn't quite understand the whole point there, but you don't make a call on this stuff out of other than integrity to the information and on the standard of beyond reasonable doubt. And the notion that you would think to advantage is that other vector we talked about. This is not where these systems are to be going. What this case is bringing out is that house without a foundation. It's what we're all discovering through the tremendous research out there is the more you poke into this and you start looking at other cases, then you got a huge problem there.
Yeah.
And
yeah, the actual guilter that we're on about
correct.
is somebody that has obviously followed Erekose to such an extent that they've actually came up with their own. What I keep getting it wrong, dude. What's their handle or name?
You're talking about Dorian Hawkmoon?
Hawk. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't help thinking that that's somebody who's connected with law enforcement in, well, maybe not law enforcement, but somebody that's in Manitowoc.
That's somebody that knows. Well. Yeah, it seems like somebody that's not just an average citizen. Some of the things they've said to me in the past, I was like, interesting. When they speak in terms of concern for Manitowoc. When I've spoken to them personally, and they speak in those terms, and so they seem like somebody who's not just some local. They seem like somebody who might be connected.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't understand the guilter argument. I think we've all looked at them and been frustrated. Happy to engage and try to dissect their argument,
right?
To understand. We're always, I think, from the outset, we've always said if you could point to anything that would make the official narrative close to being viable, we're all ears.
Yeah,
right.
But the problem is, we not only have we not heard that, we've covered up enough information. That's why I get into this idea of time and space and physics.
Right.
The official narrative is outside the planet. I mean, this is
right.
I think at the time you could argue that a jury with the information available and a bit of pizza and some Coke, sort of bent a certain way. But the official story we've demonstrated through tremendous research that not possible. So that could only leave you, if you're still a guilter, then you could say, well, he killed her another way, maybe a different date. I don't know how you pull that off.
Right. They start trying to rewrite the narrative. Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So the whole thing, the whole thing is off its foundation. It's a wonderful house, and all the parts appear to be functioning. It's off its foundation and warped. It's sort of freewheeling off into hyperspace. So I'm certainly happy to engage. It'd be interesting to take any guilter that does have an argument and a cogent argument, put it down, and let's take a look at it. See what.
Yeah, it's very rare. Very rare to get one that can say anything besides "you were duped by a documentary."
Yeah, that's the standard. Yeah.
I must admit, what I did like was speaking with Rob Belling on Sunday was the fact that he was from the point of view that he was trying to stay perfectly neutral, and he said some very, very interesting things as far as I was concerned. He wasn't as derogatory towards Ken Kratz as a lot of us have been, and he was saying that as far as from his field of being an attorney, you could tell he had a certain admiration both for Dean and Jerry and the prosecution. I think that would be fair enough to say, wouldn't it? Dude? No?
Say that one more time for me.
Okay. Let me rewind. What I was saying is in the case of Rob Belling, he had I could tell he had a certain sort of, because he's a lawyer himself. There was a certain, shall I say, admiration and respect for the lawyers on both sides in this case.
Okay.
So I got from him a sense of a little bit more of a sort of not he how can I put it simply? He's not one of us. He's not one of us full on truthers.
I would agree with that.
You know, but it was refreshing to speak to somebody like that because as TikTok Manitruck pointed out, you know, we've got Mamathon coming up. It would actually be good if you had people, as Fleetside has just mentioned, somebody from the Gilter community that could come forward and present some sort of argument, you know, some sort of, you know.
Yeah,
You're
without
not going to get that during Mamathon. You're not going to get that during Mamathon, though.
I think they're going to struggle. Yeah, I think they're going to struggle. And
they might do it. They might do it in a video where it's one-on-one outside of Mamathon. They might be willing to do it. But dude, if you're going to put them on blast with their theory on blast on Mamathon, I can't imagine any Gilter is going to want to step into that. but
let me have a crack at that. So one lawyer to another, there's a professional decorum, right? You
yes.
Which if I were a lawyer in that setting, I would be exactly like that. I would be guarded. It's part of the professional calling, professional courtesy. In fact, you know, maybe we go too far sometimes. Maybe we should be similarly, you know, always respectful. But one lawyer to another, I mean, he's playing in an arena of professionalism, and that is part of the calling.
right.
And so therefore one removes from the message, you've got to take that with a grain of salt till you understand where that's coming from. But this idea of neutral, I don't understand how one can be neutral. So at best, with someone professional who's guarded and can't say anything, you're not going to get a whole lot of information. If let's say the situation were truly worked, but you know, part of the professionalism isn't to go to the middle either, to misstate or misspeak the circumstance. But they can't badmouth colleagues in the profession, and therefore you're quite guarded in what you have to say.
Yeah,
and it can be.
I would say I spent probably my first 8 months researching after watching MAM. That first 8 months, I would say I was in a neutral position. Well, wait, not with Brendan. With Brendan, I was 100%. He was innocent from immediately watching MAM. But with Steven, I had a little more trouble. I was definitely in a neutral state for a while until once I started making MAM videos, I had pretty much made my decision by that point. But
yeah, I didn't know coming out of MAM 1. And
what was it, dude, that kind of concerned you? Because I must admit, I started from the outset, having been told about it. I said, well, no, it doesn't happen. You cannot have any kind of law enforcement taking the risk of framing somebody because the risks are so great.
Yeah.
Until I watched Making a Murder, and then I could see exactly what the police were doing there. You know.
Yeah.
But I'm intrigued as to what you maybe were.
I certainly had concerns.
Right. Yeah.
I certainly felt like Steven deserved a new trial.
Right.
After MAM, but I wasn't willing to make that leap to Steven's innocent yet. I just wasn't. I just couldn't. Yeah. But I saw enough there that I was concerned. I saw enough there that I felt it should be looked into, and it has been thoroughly now. So I mean, and that's what the truther community has brought to this. So that's you know, you all deserve.
That was exactly how I looked at it. That I didn't know at the end of that whether guilty or not. And part of my apprehensiveness was realizing and watching a documentary and suspecting that it would be, say, sensationalizing fact for entertainment, which is the guilter argument. So for whatever reason, rightly or wrongly, I came away with that not knowing, whether I was getting the straight goods on this thing. And as you're pointing out, yes, the truther investigations were incredible. But I remember the first time, and I remember, so Erekose, I remember you first time you went on air, and I've been watching your good stuff for a long, long time, and certainly Paul when you went on air. But it took me a long time to, at first, to understand what happened there. But the more you research it, the more you see what's going on, and it is quite clear. And then by the time MAM 2 rolled around, I think we were just confirming what we already knew.
Yeah. For me, I've been pounding on this lately, but for me, the real telltale, it took me maybe longer to kind of come up with this, but for me, when I look at it now, it's the breaking with SOP. The multiple times that people are breaking with standard operating procedure during the Avery case. That to me is the telltale sign, because folks, you got to understand, for law enforcement officers, standard operating procedure is a freaking safety net. Okay? It's like if they operate within standard operating procedure, they can virtually do no wrong. Doesn't matter what they do, because they stayed to standard operating procedure. It's when we see how often, in this case, officers and agents of the state chose to sacrifice or leave behind standard operating procedure or the safety net and decided to pursue things outside of standard operating procedure.
So you keep
that to me is telling.
Keep the evidence in your trunk rather than in the locked in the
Right.
files, or make the call on your personal cell phone, not on the data logged official line. It's almost as if people are afraid to spoil the story as they're carrying out their investigation. And then after the fact, like 8 years later, you can decide whether or not to write a report or not. I mean, it's a bizarre world.
Yeah.
We have a question from T1 that maybe Fleetside you would like to address to the dude.
Oh, brother. Wrong one, dude.
No, that's right. Where did it go? Yeah, do you see this happens? Sorry, Martha. They really every scrub known to man happened in this. Well, that's very true, Martha. I do accept that. But what I was looking for was see that happens. That they just all
So you want to know?
Here we go.
Did Teresa Hallbach like tigers at all?
There we go. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, no, Fleetside's going to ask you.
Yeah. What's the other what's the other show that is that reference to the
Tiger King?
Yeah, Tiger
King. Yeah.
Joe Exotic.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
T1 is the local jokester. So yeah.
And I hope you noticed. I'm surprised you've not got sunglasses to protect your eyes from the shirt I'm wearing today.
Yeah, that's quite a shirt. Yeah.
I like that shirt. It's actually pretty nice.
Well, this was one that Eunice got me, so I had to wear it because my other one wore out. So anyway, this is the latest one. Anyway, thanks, T1. Good question. Very good question. Very good question.
Yeah, but you're mixing TV shows, T1. That's
yeah.
That's
well, I mean I don't know if I've had a chance to watch the How to Fix a Drug scandal, but I was blown away with that last episode when they said that 30,000 people were basically cleared of any crime. I thought I just about cheered. I did because
I didn't.
What annoys me, right? What annoys me?
Ask me why I didn't.
Right. Okay. Oh, no. I'll get to you. Right.
Go ahead.
What I don't like is it was like when they hauled me in front of Selkirk Sheriff Court over a speeding, where I could prove to them that they'd got the wrong time. And if you're going to mess up and you're law enforcement, you have that duty to get it right. And if you don't get it right, then I'm just going to, I'm not going to swear, but I am going to take pleasure in telling you exactly where you can go.
Right on. Okay. I have to say,
your shot.
What I have to say about the cover up there in Massachusetts with the crime labs there is, number one, I think it's absolutely important, first off, that states monitor this type of stuff because number one, had they been watching these two crime lab analysts closer, or if there had been any kind of system of check and balances in Massachusetts with these lab techs, they would have found out about this a lot sooner, and it wouldn't have been as big a problem. Here's my problem. Paul here is talking about he's happy that 30,000 people were just let go and let free of their charges. I am not. I am pretty damn sure that most of those 30,000 people actually had real drugs on them when they were busted, and therefore it was legitimate.
And a lot of them had
So
already done
what
their
I'm mad
time.
at, this is the trick. What I'm mad at here is the state of Massachusetts, because number one, these 2 lab techs were found out. And what did the state of Massachusetts do? They continued to try to cover their ass.
They did
Just like
Wisconsin
freaking Manitowoc, folks.
They
continued to try to cover their ass. They didn't want this to come out. They wanted to bury it and keep it down as desperately as they possibly could. And that's what I loved about this particular show on Netflix, folks, because it shows how multiple agents from a state can jump on board a bandwagon and not have a personal vendetta. That's what that drug scandal show taught me, and I hope you all go and check it out, because that's the takeaway for any Avery supporter. I think that's the takeaway from that show. So sorry, go ahead, please.
And the bandwagon effect you're talking about there. So those that aren't into conspiracies, it doesn't take much to spin for those that are into a conspiracy, that may have conspired to do something there, through the bandwagon effect to get everybody on board, right? I don't think all this malfeasance was orchestrated far and wide. A select few that set the tone around an imperative, and largely to do with those depositions. And after that, hey. There's passion shining on it.
I get that way sometimes.
That's to make up for Paul's shirt between the two of you.
Right? I got to be louder than that thing, right? I mean, hey. Oh, man.
Here we go. Here's for all the Erekose fans, okay?
But I do suggest everybody out there check out How to Cover Up a Drug Scandal, because, folks, it will show you how agents of a state can all jump onto a bandwagon without having a personal vendetta, but they just want to help cover the state's ass because, well, they figure if a big payout goes out, it might hurt possible overtime for them in the future. It might maybe damage their pensions or something. They realize that much money getting paid out could damage their livelihood. And so they choose to go along and cover these things up. But you can clearly see it happening right there. And it's not even murder, folks. It's not even murder. And you can see the state is clearly doing something untoward, you might say.
Fleetside, you reckon it was going to take another 7 years before Stephen Avery's free. I reckon it's going to take the same amount of time for the dude to realize the name of the actual show. It's called
How to Fix a Drug Scandal?
How to Fix. You said how to cover up. And I'll tell you, it's... But no, we get what you're saying. We get your...
No worries.
Get what you're saying. Yeah.
I haven't seen that one yet. I'll have to definitely look. But what you're describing sounds exactly. It doesn't take much. It's an orientation, perhaps, of the state, the system. We just call it the system.
Yeah.
It's an orientation. You've noted before the coincidence of typos and I look at coincidences, I looked at the Carmen Bootwell thing. First of all, the depositions, that drove me wild, still drives me wild.
Yeah.
That you could be that in that proximity, just when the two kingpins were about to be deposed, and they were trying to push the date, and then suddenly, like, holy smokes, talk about lightning striking, the lottery win.
Yeah, right.
And then you get into the RAV identity question. Not to open that can of worms, but which coincidentally had the VIN number played with. That's a huge coincidence. And Herman with the, auto salvage. But and the Carmen Bootwell was to me that was another lightning strike. I didn't know how that factored in, but you've got coincidentally another victim at the same time, the same size, weight, sex, obviously. What are the chances? So I always look at the lightning strikes, and I have to say I haven't been able to any better than anyone else unpack what's happened. But I did have some discussions with some, people that have incredibly well researched positions in detail that are
Right.
going to come out, and we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
We have an objector to you, dude.
No.
An objector.
Sure.
Yeah.
She was drugged out of her mind, Erekose. If you think that's okay and conviction should stand, I disagree. Crockett Thompson. I'm sorry. Let me address your concern. If I thought her being high would have compromised her test results, I would agree with you. But in relation to the lab technician that was getting high, I believe there is less probability that she was making mistakes. And you know why I believe that? The reason why I believe that is because she was using their samples to get high at one point. When she couldn't just use the lab sample anymore, she was replacing real drugs with fake drugs that were coming in so that she could get high. This tells me the drugs are good.
But
this tells me they're real drugs.
But do you not
and
get
so
the
therefore
mole?
I believe, therefore I believe most of the Ferac tests were probably accurate. However, can you go back and prove that now? Can you go back and prove that now? No. Can an attorney go back and test that sample now and find out it's fake drugs and probably, whatever? Yes. But my point is she was getting high off of their supply. It was real drugs to begin with. This is why I'm criticizing Massachusetts for not doing what they needed to do, for not doing what should have been proper. I go, that's why, this is why I'm so angry with Massachusetts. Whatever, I give a damn about Ferac, the drug analyst. She's a drug addict. Okay, she's a drug addict. It's the state that allowed this to go on. It's the state that tried to cover this up. It's the state that tried to minimize this. And that's the takeaway, folks. That's the takeaway.
But seriously, though, can you have somebody who is doing something illegal themselves being responsible for helping to convict somebody who is doing something illegal themselves?
Which is why the state of Massachusetts should have had some checks and balances in place, and they would have been able to figure out what Ferac was doing. And they would have been able to figure out what was the other one? Dukin? They would have been able to figure out what Dukin was doing. But they didn't have any of that. They didn't care. And now this is all blown up in their face.
There has to be some sort of punitive damages. They didn't even have a system whereby these technicians are going in and test. She was there nearly 10 years. She never once was asked to do a drug test. They never once did a drug test on her.
Right.
Look, if you know.
But how would that have helped with Dukin? How would a drug test have helped with Dukin?
No.
It wouldn't.
In other words, there has to be general sort of control over
They need to be
people,
monitoring these people.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, the colleagues were saying, she's doing this dry benching whereby she's getting 15 samples, testing one of them, and saying that they're all when one of them was table salt.
Now, I will say this: with the exonerations under Dukin, I believe that there's a good chance that there may be some of those cases where they didn't actually have real drugs. I believe some of those cases actually could have been somebody selling fake drugs to somebody trying to make money. And because of the way Dukin did her analysis, as you've just described, Paul, where she would take 10 or 15 bags that all looked similar. And trust me, folks, when you're trying to sell fake drugs to somebody, you want to make sure it looks similar because you want that person to look at it and be willing to pay for it, right? So by her judging by the look of it and then taking one of those samples out of 10 or 15 and testing just one, there's a great deal of people who could have their samples tested in her case, and they would probably find out that it was fake drugs. But my heart of hearts tells me that probably most of her reports were probably accurate, whether or not she had actually tested the drugs. So when it comes to Dukin, obviously, due process has to take. Obviously, due process exists, and people deserve to be represented properly. But when it comes down to it, do I believe that Dukin and Farak were screwing up and like to a horrible amount? No. I believe Dukin, there's more room for people to go back and test and find out what was what. But with Farak, I believe everything she said was drugs. I believe it was because she was getting high off it. And so, hopefully you guys can understand what I'm saying here. But the point is, these two lab technicians were creating an embarrassment for the state of Massachusetts, and the state of Massachusetts tried to minimize it.
So
just
if you
like
had
Manitowoc is doing now.
Yeah. So if you had a Sherry Culhane type in there, known to be, or let's say that is demonstrated to make mistakes, then you got to throw out the batch. It's a bit like, I haven't seen what you're talking about, but
right.
If I understand correctly, because of known errors, they had to throw out all, right? Which leaves a lawless circumstance. And in the case of Sherry Culhane, bringing it back sort of Stephen's case, same thing applies. Can you imagine how many cases she's attached to that call into question? You got to throw out the batch. And that's the greater wallet issue for like, it's almost an untenable situation for the state. And it's just that pressure, I don't understand how that pressure plays out on court determinations. The two seem to be joined at the hip, and they ought not to be.
Well, when you watch it, you're gonna see a questionable court decision by a judge. There's all kinds of stuff. I'd really love to have a conversation with you after you watch How to Fix a Drug Scandal, Fleetside, because there's one judge that just, it looks like he's going down the right path. He's asking the prosecution to prove what they're saying. He's asking the prosecution to, he's like, wait, why are they saying they haven't seen this? And the judge is realizing, I haven't seen this. So if I haven't seen it, I know it's not there. And so he asks the prosecutor to bring in this certain paperwork. You'll see what I'm talking about when you watch it. But he asked that prosecutor to bring it in. The prosecutor then writes him a letter and tells him, oh, it's already been turned over. It's a lie. It has not been turned over. Judge doesn't check it. He just goes along with it, and boom.
Yeah.
So I've got a question for you, dude.
Yeah.
Lenk and Colburn clearly have got questions about their investigation.
Certainly.
How did the key find its way there after 7 searches?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's one of the obvious things. Yes.
How is it that Colburn receives a phone call eight years before Stephen is exonerated, passes it to Jim Link, the detective, and they sit on it?
Right.
And various other things involved with, Is it not fair then that once Stephen Avery is exonerated and Brendan, that everybody that's been convicted by the help of Lenk and Colburn should have their convictions looked at?
Looked at? I'm cool with that. I'm cool with having anything that Lenk and Colburn were involved in looked at.
If you've not got the time to do that, surely you just say, we just throw the conviction out. Because if they have committed that kind of cardinal sin in one case,
are you about to try to cross over into other cases? That's where we're going to run into trouble.
If we'd all shut up, then there'd be a better chance of freeing Steve Avery. But I think you're right that this is going to expand. Already has, right? We've already, the truthers, whether they intended to or not, have been dredging up more cases.
Yes.
Of alleged malfeasance, and so just bringing it back to the lab technician of choice. I mean, this is batch processing. You got one in the bunch. This is a game of integrity. If one sample's bad, you got to chuck the batch.
Yep.
And that's the big question. I don't think the county or the state, for that matter, want to unleash lightly. And the question is, how far will they go? Like we all know as truthers, others have done the research that I benefit from looking at. But as a team, it's incredible what's been uncovered. There's no real debate. I mean, it's not like we're waiting for information to know for sure.
Yeah.
We know enough to throw the narrative of the official story right out of the room. It's nonsense, right? So
it's booms out the Rwinde. Anyway.
Yeah. You got to check the batch, and that's the difficulty, right? So that's where I don't know whether take the current judge, for example. It would be interesting to sit and have many beers with her just to understand where her mind is at, because as a fellow human being, we all share the same gray matter and the same moral compass, and it just the painstaking way in which they're sort of cornered and having to work their way out of the box is it's almost embarrassing. Well, it is embarrassing, actually. Yeah.
Right.
This is just uncharacteristic.
I would like. Here's an interesting thing. Linda's put forward.
Well, yeah. Hopefully we'll bring more.
Yep, that's one good thing, isn't it? That more and more people are coming forward and looking at making a murderer, which is still the well. Look, there's no other story. Story, I think, is the wrong word, but there's no other scenario where somebody has been wrongfully convicted twice, and he was wrongfully convicted the second time to cover up the fact that he was wrongfully convicted the first time. Right. This is as Dean Strang once said, this is off the charts.
Right. And remember how when MAM1 first came out, folks?
Yeah.
And you kept hearing from guilters and agents of the state how lightning doesn't strike twice. They kept talking about this as if it was a lightning strike. It's like, no, wait a second. It's not a lightning strike. You people, this isn't like what happened in 1985 might have been a lightning strike, but what happened in 2005 was orchestrated. So lightning strikes aren't orchestrated. So yeah, no, that ain't working. But I remember so many people saying that lightning doesn't strike twice. What the are you talking about? Lightning.
But part of my point in that is that it's not just twice. So you're saying one incarceration and the second to maintain the what would have happened to them on the first. But I'm trying to parse it into 7 separate planned, calculated missteps as part of a procedure that's expanding in terms of the size of the organization. It could be bandwagon effect as we're thinking. That's entirely possible.
Yeah.
But there's a malfeasance that's propagating here. There's a mandatory zone that we're not allowed to crawl into, and but sooner or later we'll find a court that's going to lift the kimono and we'll see all.
Lift the kimono, I like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
well.
wild.
Listen, this has been a bit of an epic. We've gone for an hour and 37 minutes so far.
Been a lot of fun.
It's been great fun, and there hasn't been, as far as I can see, there hasn't been a great deal questions, more sort of comments, and I think it's once again it's proved very interesting. I mean, look, from my point of view, if it puts the frighteners on people in Manitowoc and Wisconsin about what their sheriff's department in Manitowoc is willing to put their citizens through.
Yeah,
I think that's it has to be pointed out. There has to be at some point a resolution of this. And dare I say it, maybe 72, 73 million is on the conservative side.
It would be a precedent center, I think, right?
You know?
Yeah.
Someone could inform us, but I don't think there's been anything close to that. But
Right. The judges usually tend to knock it down quite a bit.
yeah, but don't forget, I've already knocked it down to 50%, and
Right.
But my key point is not in the discount factor. It's that I've never seen a circumstance tried where the system has perpetuated through these 7 data points to engineer and continue to consider. That's the allegation. If demonstrated, that's outside the pale. This is uncharted territory in terms of the quantum, I think.
Right.
No, this was an interesting comment. If I can find it. There it was. There it was. Just shot past it. Somebody said that I look like I'm on some sort of vaccination.
Vaccination or vacation?
Oh,
It's the shirt.
I'm seeing double.
It's the shirt, dude.
Straight from the beaches of Scotland.
Yeah. The beaches of Scotland. May they be sunny at some point, someday.
Well, it's pitch bloody black outside at the moment, but never mind.
Hey,
okay, listen.
Hey, most days they're overcast though. Come on, let's be honest.
Yeah. As you know, in the Bible, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And it was a disaster. Here we just call it summer.
We just call it summer, right? Yeah.
Anyway, cheers, fellas.
Yeah.
Yes. Cheers.
Anyway, dude, could you do the honors, please?
All right, folks. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and that's bye from me.
And it's goodbye from him. Bye bye.
Yeah.
Fleetside catches on quick. I love it.